I'd like to introduce you now to two guests who are sitting in front of me at the top of the tower, a dynamic duo who are behind the Rest is History podcast, which happens to be the most subscribed podcast in the UK and one of the top 5 most downloaded podcasts of any genre in the UK. They're back with a new book. It's called The Rest is History, Returns an A to Z of Historical Curiosities. Welcome, Dominic Sandbrook and Tom Holland. Good to see you both again. Thanks for being with us.
That's a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
How do you find the view from here? Because as two history nerds looking out the window to see the City of London and the Tower of London, and it must be quite a nice place to be.
It's amazing. You've got layer on layer on history out there, haven't you? It's also quite Bond villain. I quite like that.
Yes, yes. Do you want a cat?
Yeah, I'd love a cat.
We should get you a cat that would make the difference.
Well, we've got an episode coming. We've got a series coming up on the Roman invasion and conquest of Britain.
Yes.
And London begins as a Roman city. And when you look out and you see the Thames and you see how it's open to the seas, but you also see the bridges, you realise exactly why London grows the moment the Roman comes.
Well, let's stick with Romans for a second, Tom, because there was this thing that was doing the rounds, as you know, about a year or so ago, about people think about the Roman Empire at least 20 times a day or that kind of thing. Did you fall into that category? And what did you make of that?
Well, I was surprised it was so low. I mean, I think about the Roman Empire at least 100 times a day, I should think.
Where did that come from? Do you know the genesis
of
that?
Well, I think it was specific. It was it was the girlfriend of an American bloke who asked, who said, how many times do you think about the Roman Empire? He said, I don't know, 10, 20. Yeah. And she was astonished and put a message out on social media. And the whole of America basically piled in and said, yeah, all my boyfriends are thinking about the Roman Empire all the time. And I think it's specifically an American thing because America was founded as a republic after kicking out a king, which is what the Romans did when they established their republic. And in Washington, you have a Capitol and you have a Senate, and the architecture is incredibly Roman. So I think, in a way, America thinks of itself as being Roman to a degree more than any other country, perhaps.
A natural successor to the old empire.
Well, there's that as well, of course. Yes.
And like all empires, they fade and die, which watching modern America feels like
I think that's been an anxiety for the Americans since the Republic was founded, because there are two falls in Roman history. There's the fall of the Roman Empire, of course, which everyone knows about, but there is also the fall of the Roman Republic, the democratic system, the republican system of government, when Caesar comes to power and establishes an autocracy. And you can see in the build-up to the current election that all these old anxieties about the Republic falling and a strong man coming to power is very much part of the dynamic.
With a whiff of violence in the air.
Yeah, and I think maybe subliminally, but maybe not, bearing in mind how many times people in America are thinking about the Romans, that maybe that's a kind of shadow that hangs over people.
It's an
there.
Existential, intellectual thought process. Maybe. Dominic, can I ask you about children and history? And you've written books for younger people and so on. I often say to kids who don't like history, say, you just haven't met the right teacher yet.
Yeah.
Tell me about young people and history. Where are they at the moment as you read it? Is there a growth of it, or is it dying, or where is it? What's happening?
No, I don't think it's dying at all. I think actually we have an enormous appetite as human beings for stories and for characters, and I think kids who say they don't like history probably haven't been exposed to it in the most exciting and interesting way. And I think sometimes when it's a school subject, when it feels like homework, people are obviously turned off it. But I think it's one thing we do with the podcast, one thing I do in my children's books, and Tom does in his books. I think if you say to people, look, this isn't hard work and it's not homework and there's not going to be a test. These are amazing stories about extraordinary individuals, but it's also a window into a time that's different from ours. And I think one of the things that we try to do in The Rest is History is to get across to people, and that includes actually a lot of young people, because so many of our audience are very young.
50% are under 35,
right,
which is extraordinary.
Exactly. Lots of people, lots of teenagers, lots of students, all of that kind of thing.
Love that.
What we try to get across to them is, we don't try to judge the past particularly. We don't sit as kind of, judge and jury, kind of hangmen, looking at the past and marking people up or down based on whether we think they're moral. We try to understand why it was different, and to enjoy the otherness of the past, if you like. And I think for kids, that's really exciting. The idea of the past being completely different and people having wacky adventures. Alexander the Great, Cleopatra, Julius Caesar, all the characters that we talk about, going right up to your Winston Churchill and D-Day or whatever. I think that sense of another world, of people having incredible adventures. I mean, why would an 8-year-old not enjoy that? Of course, they would all enjoy that if you communicate it in the right way.
One of the weird ones is I've talked to young people under 10 the Titanic. What is it about the Titanic that grabs kids particularly with such because such a morbid
it's
thing?
It's a huge ship, right? It's a massive ship.
It's Titanic.
It's dripping with
It's Titanic,
with opulence, of course. It's the most advanced ship of its kind. But it's also that I think we all love a story which is the kind of inevitability of disaster, the countdown towards what you know is coming and they don't. And I think that's part of the pleasure.
I think also it's the sense that you have an entire society on that ship. You have the super rich, you have the Zuckerbergs of the day on that ship.
Yes.
Then you have people in the lower class, and then you have the third class, and they're all there, and they're very strictly demarcated socially on board the ship. And then when the ship hits the iceberg, they're all facing death.
Yes.
And that, I think, was what made the film, the Leonardo DiCaprio film, as powerful as it was this sense that people from different classes can meet. And I think that that's a crucial part of the story, because when you look at the actual people who are on that ship, they're not just from Britain or from America. They're from across the world. You've got Japanese people, you've got someone from Haiti, you've got people escaping genocide in the Middle East.
The Irish, of course.
You've got the Irish
pulled
coming
into Cove.
And of course it's an Irish story.
Yeah, Belfast, built in
Belfast.
It's
coming into what was then Queenstown and is now Cove. So it's an incredible story, and it's about so much. It's about Anglo-American relations. It's about technology.
Hubris.
It's about hubris.
Yeah.
The fact that you have the First World War breaking out 2 years later gives it the force of this kind of eerie, ominous metaphor.
And it's the human stories as well. We had a story that we told when we did the podcast episodes on it, of a boy who was given a pair of trousers, long trousers, for his 16th birthday. And when they're boarding the lifeboats, he's got these trousers on. Now he looks young, and people say to him, "Why don't you take the trousers off and put your shorts back on, because then you'll be able to go with the women and children." And he says, "No, I will not take the trousers off. I would rather stay here and die with the men."
Wow. And he does.
And he does die.
You see, there's just all these stories, and that's the fascination. Even as we're talking now, you kind of want to watch the old Kenneth More movie, The Night in September, which of course was another beautiful but sad take on that story. All right, Dominic and Tom, just stick around for a few minutes. So we've got more. I want to talk about the book. I've loads of places to go, so stay with us. Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook, as a history guy, to be chatting with the fellas during the music, it's like being in a little salon and discussing the different things that you're doing. Your book, The Rest is History, returns an A to Z of historical curiosities. Is the book as a kind of 15, 12, 30, 40, 15 and beyond year old, on a Christmas Day, if I got this, I would have disappeared for the week until the new year. No, honestly, it
Glad
is.
to hear it.
No, I really mean that. I don't say that lightly. I'm not interested in Plumos. This is a terrific book from beginning to end. It just goes to so many places, whether it's the Romans inspiring science fiction to the JFK chapter. Of course, I'm fascinated by that, and the takedown of the conspiracy theories and so on. It's dedicated, the book, to. Do you want to tell us about that? The dedication is fascinating. Franz Ferdinand.
Dedicated to Franz Ferdinand,
not the
who
band,
was assassinated. No, who was assassinated in Sarajevo, and his wife Sophie. Because when we finished the book, we had just come back from Sarajevo, where we did a series where we basically walked in the footsteps of Franz Ferdinand in the journey that he did that day in 1914.
Okay, interesting.
When he's assassinated by Gavrilo Princip.
Yeah.
The shots that genuinely changed the world.
Absolutely.
And normally people just say, "Oh, he's a terrible Austrian walrus," and who cares that he died? But we actually were quite sympathetic to him,
and particularly
weren't we?
Sophie, his wife, who is often forgotten.
Yeah.
But
who was also murdered that day.
She was shot in the car.
I didn't realise
she was
that.
a kind of a wonderful woman. I mean, she was basically the person who tamed him, because he was very prone to get angry, and she, my darling, calm him down.
Yeah.
But she suffered terribly from the Habsburg court because she was not of sufficient class in the opinion of
she was only a countess,
the emperor.
She wasn't
only
good
a
enough.
countess,
Unbelievable.
So she was allowed to marry him, but she wasn't allowed to claim any of the kind of the perks that would come from marrying him as the heir. So whenever there were royal processions, and so whenever there were processions, she would always have to come in at the end. If it was high, the table, she'd be right at the bottom of the table. It was awful.
Yeah.
Poor
and then
woman.
Gavrilo Princip shoots her.
Yeah.
And then no one remembers that she was even there.
No,
so it was a terrible story.
It's very unlike the Kennedy story, because everyone talks about Jackie and what suit she was wearing and everything else. Like a totally different story entirely. You talk about the Romans inspiring science fiction. Can I ask you a little bit about that? That baffles me.
It kind of goes back to what we were talking about America imagining itself as Rome.
Yeah.
And that idea of Rome as the archetype of an empire. And so all you have to do really is push that out into space. And you will often find that empires in space have a kind of Roman echo. So Star Wars would be a classic one.
Yes.
That again, you have a republic,
an emperor.
against an emperor.
Yeah.
The Senate, all of that.
Yeah, of course. It all chimes.
Yeah. And there's a very famous series of novels written by Isaac Asimov, I think in the 50s, called Foundation, which was Asimov was reading Edward Gibbon's account of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And he sets it in space. There's this vast galactic empire with this great planet, which is the equivalent of Rome in the center of it. And there's a historian who has worked out how to crunch the data to tell the future. And he's worked out that this empire is going to fall. And so he sets up a foundation. And the plot mirrors episodes in Roman history.
Fascinating. I was reading a book about Captain Cook, The Wide Wide Sea by Hampton Sides, and in it there's I don't know if somebody somewhere mentions the fact that Captain Cook is on a ship going to lands where no one's gone before, and then flip that to the sky, Captain Kirk is in the sky,
exactly.
going to know where no land's left before.
And not coincidentally, because Gene Roddenberry was a huge admirer of Captain James Cook.
Was he?
And so Captain James Kirk is very
Tiberius is in there.
Nobody remembers from that voyage. Captain Cook is the goat. So Captain Cook had this amazing goat who had already gone around the world, I think, once, Tom.
Yeah.
And was a proven sea dog, a proper traveller. Because their goat would give milk no matter where it was, unceasingly. Yeah. And people said when Captain Cook went off on his voyage, friends said to him, "Mate, you've got to take this goat with you.
It's a brilliant goat.
As goats go, this is the golden goat."
So that is a goat who has been around the world twice. And when Cook returns from his voyage, all the focus is on the goat.
Yeah.
It gets voted honours in Parliament. It gets a special kind of a collar. Dr. Johnson writes it a poem in Latin.
Oh my God!
And it's given its own field.
Well, yeah. That goat got notions, I'd say.
Yeah.
But the tragic thing is we don't even know what she was called.
Well, that's
just the goat.
This is the rest is history returns. Brackets with a goat for the third book, because you got to find out what happened,
right.
and bring a voice to like Franz Ferdinand's wife to the goat. And by the way, just for the voyages around the world, Kew Gardens, when you go to what you might think is just beautiful plants in botany, but actually it's all related to history from the 18th century.
So Joseph Banks, who is going with Cook and is basically Mr. Spock. He's the kind of the science officer.
Yeah.
But actually, he's nothing like Mr. Spock, because he's very emotional. And they get to Tahiti, and Banks is the first person not just to see surfing, but to take it up.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's kind of amazing detail.
This is why your show is so good, because you just you breathe life into what was considered to be maybe stuffy storytelling. I love what you guys do. Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook, thanks for being with us today. Good luck at the Royal Albert Hall, which is sold out with an orchestra and so on, and then good luck on your tour to America, and continued success with your podcast. You're doing terrific work. It's lovely to see you both. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks
for
so much.
having us.